Welcome to Concrete Conversations, the Indian real estate podcast. Renting in metro cities is often fraught with difficulties for young Indians and for landlords as well. While tenants struggle with issues related to connectivity, transparency, and even discrimination in some cases, landlords struggle with maintaining their property over the long run while also achieving a minimum rental yield. Residential rent, therefore, is a largely unorganized subsector with asymmetry of information and a lack of benchmarks when it comes to tenant and landlord expectations. To bridge this gap, today's guest, Mr.Vijeth Reddy, along with his wife Sangeeta, in 2019 founded Kots, who are currently reshaping the residential rent market in East Bangalore with a mission to solve urban housing for young India. Mr. Reddy is an engineer by education and a serial entrepreneur with a history of building startups across various sectors. Kots is one of the few companies in the residential space that is working with developers to operate a build-to-rent model. The company maximizes return for landlords while also giving out 11-month rental contracts to the young professionals of India. Kots has already developed a strong foundation in East Bangalore, having served over 900 tenants and 50 landlords over the last 4 years. As more Indians enter the workforce every given year and as developers look to diversify their portfolios from the traditional residential sale-based business model, we could see a bright future in this space. So without further ado, let's get started. Hi Vijay, welcome to Concrete Conversations. We hope you're having a good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. How's your morning going?
Hey, hi, Ash. Nice actually seeing you guys from YouTube to actually meeting you guys kind of live. Yeah.
So usually we'd like to start off with, to set the scene by getting a kind of brief career overview from our guests. So, our listeners can understand their journey and how they got to where they are today in their career. So could you tell us a little bit about your, career journey and how you got to founding Kots?
So basically, it's me and my wife, Sangeeta, who are the founders of Kots.
Hmm.
Uh, so Sangeeta has 10 years experience into the IT. She worked with HUL, Accenture, Microland.
Right.
Uh, Before I tell you what I did, we both thought, let's do something after marriage, something we can work together and create something. That's how we
Hmm.
kind of landed up in uh, this startup. And of
Right.
course, why real estate? Because I feel it's a large core market which needs a lot of disruption, and it's a massive cash flow business, right?
Hmm.
So prior to Cots, of course, I studied in Bangalore, did my engineering. I have 10 years experience in startups. This is my third startup, by the way.
Hmm.
Then I
Wow.
moved
Okay.
to France. I did my double masters in business at EDHEC. Came
Wow.
back, was working with a sales analytical firm in Whitefield. That's when
Hmm.
I've experienced this problem. When you move to Bangalore, you will see that finding an apartment online is not easy,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
right? And the only option I personally found was the co-living or the service apartments, which are really not meant to stay long,
Right.
right? And then also the context of Bangalore is, at least prior to COVID, you need to pay 10 months of deposit, and then you have to do maybe 3-4 lakhs of capex on a small 2 BHK flat. And considering we don't know how long we stay, because we are all here for the jobs. And that's how this entire concept of COTS came, experiencing the problem.
Perfect. And I'm glad that you brought that up because it's something we've been talking about with other guests as well, whether it's co-living operators or student housing operators. This problem definitely exists in India, not even just in Bangalore or Whitefield or areas that are near catchment centers for CBDs or something like that. But if you could just elaborate on this problem statement a little bit for us, what are the challenges that maybe young Indians in metros today face when they're looking to find an apartment? What are the obstacles that they have to kind of get through?
Right. I would basically point it out to three major problems. The first problem being discovery. Now, you have very good popular aggregators, but
Hmm.
everybody knows the content what they have or the listings what they have are not relevant.
Right.
Even brokers put wrong pictures to attract you,
Hmm.
or even landlords, they don't remove the listings when they're it's done, right? And it's not possible for an internet company to get the accurate information unless you have a fleet of people on ground, right?
Right.
The second part, let's say you find a very good apartment, but what you see online is not what you really get offline, right? Unless it's a professional landlord, it's managed using professional facility management, it is not possible people can guarantee you how the flat will look like, right? Imagine you get a good landlord who even gave you a good apartment, but the last part is, what is your tenant experience? What happens when you have issues? Can you be assured that the rent deposits are returned back on time, right?
Right.
uh, who will address your grievances, right? So these are the top three challenges which requires an institutional organized, a player who's organizing this fragmented market.
That's the perfect point for us to sort of get a little deeper into the concept of Kots. So you highlighted these three pain points that young renters face in India. Could you tell us how Kots is solving these issues, and where you all come into the market?
So we on our website you can see all our projects, and all these projects are built to rent, which are entirely operated by us. So first, it gives you relevant listings, or you
Right.
find relevant flats to rent, right? Second, since we are taking the contrarian view of going inventory heavy or a asset kind of heavy model, we have a large operations team which is kind of checking all the flats, putting the relevant content, exact pictures of the flat before you move in. We also give about 100 pictures of how the condition of the flat before handover, right? All this is possible because we are doing a operations heavy model.
Right.
Second, we have a support team which people can reach us through call or WhatsApp. It's a professional support team, so you know your problems are addressed, right? Some of our peers who have a manager in residence, it's not a very efficient model. Reason being, there is no transparency. What is the manager doing, or all the issues resolved? Now we
Right.
simply leverage on tech, and we are a central team. We can assure you a certain experience, right? Our contracts are given upfront. People even before they book, so they digitally sign before they take the handover. So which
Okay.
clearly outlays the scope of both the parties, including when will they get the refund, things like that.
Right. Right.
Right. And I think that helps streamline the process for sure. On the other side of things, what is the relationship between Kots and either the landlord, or in this case, the builder, or um, just to flesh out, because we're talking about the rental market in India being very disorganized. So, is it a single landlord that you typically work with? Is it like fragmented, different owners of different apartments? Could you flesh that model out a little bit for us as well?
Right. So we are trying to build a hybrid platform based model, which is basically not just listings, but we go heavy on the platform.
Okay.
But the key part or the problem we are solving is not demand, unlike co living operators. What we
Okay.
are solving is for supply. Because for a professional landlord to enter this game with 3% average rental yields in India and a lot of hassle to manage tenants, it is not a viable model to enter, right?
Mm-hmm.
In our model, because we leverage on the BTR and we can guarantee yields, in addition to that, we also work in areas where there is a lot more demand. People are looking for houses. So this kind of helps us to give a higher return, a predictable return to the landlord. So we commit about 6 to 7% rental yield on a fully compliant OCCC project, which is unseen in an Indian context, right? And since a landlord is technically our customer, he is getting a zero hassle of property management where we take care of end to end. AMCs are paid by us. We have in-house workforce to take care of the painting, plumbing, electricals, any small carpentry issues. That's the capabilities we have built so that the landlord is secure, seeing this only as an investable product.
Right. And, just to follow up from that, like you said, you're offering much higher yields in a market where the average rental yield in India for residential is 3%. So, The yield aside, because build to rent is a new model, developers are usually looking to for that churn. They want to get rid of inventory as soon as possible. So what was that process like? What was the thought process behind converting these builders, moving their attention towards cash flow and yield model versus a churn and inventory selling model?
I would outlay the context of this problem. BTR is a global phenomenon, and
Right.
people around the world have realized BTR is a better way of housing compared to built for sale, right?
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, coming to India,
Could I interject over there? Could you elaborate on why you say it's a better way of housing than built for sale?
right. Now, when you build housing for rent in a globalized economy where people cannot afford to settle down, right? It's not possible they can maybe pay 2 crores and settle down in one area,
Hmm.
uh, and they're traveling continuously, right?
Right.
BTR is basically addressing the needs of the exact tenant, what they want for the housing. It is optimized for the stay experience than the buying experience. See, when you want to
Hmm.
buy, possibly you want large spaces, better woodwork, but renting is all about functionality, right?
Right. Right.
Second, it's a better way to solve sustainability. When you buy an asset, not necessarily you have capabilities to maintain the sustainability operations, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
When with a BTR operator, he is more conscious on the power consumption, water consumption. How can we use renewable material wherever it is possible, right? With the numbers,
Hmm.
right? So, I personally feel BTR is the way to go for future. So coming back to the old question, since we already know or people are trying to deploy BTR everywhere in the world, we wanted to experiment with a thought in India. But what we have realized, a lot of developers are still not ready for that because the yields are low, right?
Right. Right.
And the context for this, to add a nuance, is if you see 20 years back, most of the developers were only into residential selling.
Right.
Hmm.
And from the last decade or two, developers have realized they have to diversify. And you see commercial sale portfolio, commercial renting portfolio, which is the malls.
Hmm.
But what is missing in this ecosystem is residential renting portfolio,
Right.
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 which we foresee in the next decade to pick up quite a bit,
Hmm.
right? And hence we are trying to build a brand a decade in advance, so we kind of make the market ready for that.
Right. And just as a natural follow on, I guess, to that, is in a market where yields are low, what sort of measures or what sort of conditions are needed for you to be able to offer these high yields to developers? Is it really location centric, that like right next to CBDs, that the catchment area is there for you to get these returns? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Of course, location, locality, and price are the three most important factors for renting business.
Hmm.
Whenever you consider a dense urban center or a fast growing urban center,
Hmm.
usually developers are slow to catch the demand. A
Right.
typical developer takes 3 years, 4 years to get the inventory up, right? Now, wherever there is a supply and demand gap, the asymmetry is where we flare. We
Hmm.
understand people are searching on Google for so many 1 BHKs or furnished 1 BHKs, and the queries are not addressed. So we
Hmm.
know the demand. We ask the developers, why don't you do a project which is kind of 12 months, 16 months, we can hit the market using prefabs, factory made wooden work, right? So we will be able to address the gap better.
Hmm.
And another large problem we have personally faced, a lot of developers are moving to larger land parcels.
Right. Right.
Kind of lost interest in that 10,000, which was I don't know if you remember, people used to call these apartments like long back. Now it's all become
Yeah.
a society, right? So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Yeah.
apartment is a gap, the inventory size is a gap, which is exactly where we are trying to position ourselves.
Hmm. Hmm. Right. And just, since you mentioned the word society, it's something that I had thought of. Obviously, we as the people working in real estate have gone straight into the business model, but moving back to, the kind of consumer experience a little bit. One of the issues that people deal with is, dealing with societies and RWAs when they're renting. So, how did you solve that problem with Kots? And just for my understanding, when you're taking a build to rent construction building, suppose, right, to rent out to people, you're taking the entire building itself, right, all the units in it, which also kind of helps bypass the society and like rules issue here, right?
Typically, our projects are 30 flats to 100 flats. Recently, we are working with large builders to develop pre-leased 500, 600 units where they'll pre-lease it to us and they sell that as a USP. I mean, showing that as a USP, they want to sell that inventory. But since currently it is a 30 to 100, there are challenges. When you have, let's say, 50 families who stay together with bachelors, there are challenges. It is just about getting the expectations right, making sure we inform the expectations well in advance, kind of solves the problem.
Right, right.
And just building on concept now that we're talking about, it's the developers use the pre-lease as a USP to sell the flats, but you're looking at 30 to 100 flats that you take out. From a consumer standpoint, what is exactly the offering, the product mix, the flat size, the inventory makeup of the buildings that you take on?
First thing, since we work from last 4 years building insights into the market, we know what matters in a renting business.
Hmm.
Smaller kitchens, larger open spaces, balconies, right? You need to have a workstation. So these are the things which we have seen people have changed, or the demography preference has changed, right? Now, translating this back to our floor plan, we could optimize a 1 BHK into a 330 carpet. Now, when you
Wow.
want
Hmm.
to buy the same 1 BHK for sale in mind, you are looking at a 500 carpet or a 450 carpet, which is
Right.
not.
Right.
So we could optimize the space, find the locations where the rental yield is much higher than the cost per SFT,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
combine this, we will be able to give a better yield for the investor.
Right.
Right, and just building on the same train of thought, because it's interesting about what you said about optimizing the space. At what point typically would you say that it's the best time for Kots to get involved with the developer of the project? Is it from the planning stage that you all could potentially help with optimizing the apartment makeup for the project, or is it after the planning's already kicked in?
Typically, we work with two types of projects, where which is built for rent from the scratch, where the
Hmm. Hmm.
plans are given by us, we sit with them, optimize, we help them the entire project management. Second, we do repurposing projects as well, where you take an old 20-year-old building, which maybe two landlords or three landlords own that for rent. We
Right.
repurpose the interiors, everything in a modern way. That's another way. We building it from scratch is of course easy.
Hmm.
Repurposing is a challenge. We are also trying to crack that.
Right.
Since you mentioned furnishing, I wanted to ask you um, about that. How do you decide the kind of furnishing spec? How far do you go? Is it white goods as well, or is it basic furniture, and then the onus is kind of on the tenant, given that this is supposed to be a home for them and not just a temporary kind of co-living situation? And the second part to this was the capex for this, right? Is the capex something that Cots gets into themselves, or is again you work with developers to kind of work on the capex?
Right. So the first part of question, how did we go about furnishing? If you want to guarantee people what you see is what you get,
Hmm.
the problem to be solved is furnishing.
Right.
The second
Right.
problem in Indian market, if people after staying for 3 years or 4 years, the properties don't become relevant because they become in a very bad condition.
Hmm.
So to solve this, we literally had to do R&D on the sofas, on the beds, on
Right.
every aspect, and then build capabilities around it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Right.
after we did the R&D on sofa, we found a vendor, and the vendor is taking the servicing aspect on him for the next 5 years, right?
Right.
Even apply, we have tie-ups with Chroma or people like that, right?
Hmm.
The second part of the question, after you figure out this optimal product for
Hmm.
interiors, who is putting on the capex? Now, usually, if it is a landlord who's expecting a higher yield, he puts the capex. A
Hmm.
landlord who's looking for stability in mind, he wants us to put the capex, so he's assured that we're going to work for a long time with him.
Right.
Right. Speaking of timelines and what you said about, just you gave an example of a tenant staying for 3 to 4 years. What is the average tenant timeline that Kots typically would like to work with or does work with?
We see that about 60 to 70% people renew their contracts. So, which means they're looking at 20 to 22 months of stay duration. We work with a minimum 6 months lock in,
And what is the typical contract length then? Because you said that they renew and it's 22 months. So what is the standardized contract length that you offer?
11 months.
Just a final follow up on this. We were talking about stability for developers, right? So I wanted to ask you, what is the kind of end goal or potential exit here for a developer, right? Suppose you work with them for a contract duration. Is it set up in a way that developers, once this is over and the market has maybe changed, X number of years on, that they can sell the units, or how would that work?
So there are two types of developers who want rental residential portfolio, which is not usually the case because they get a better yield in a commercial setup, right?
Right, right.
Ideally, a developer wants to build this, sell it to an HNI within a year or two. He's looking at a 25%, 30% margin, and he wants to liquidate the asset. In a pre-leased inventory, that's usually a medium developer who's trying to differentiate his product. So he's building a 1 BHK, let's say at 55, 60 lakhs, he wants to sell the unit. And Kots is coming into the board telling we will guarantee your 20,000 rent to the tenant or the end investor who's buying the asset. So they get a 9-year lease agreement from us. So they're assured that the EMIs are paid by Kots, right? So
Right,
that's another
right.
model.
And jumping again to the other side of the transaction, because I know we talked about how technically the client for Kots is the investor, but I know we've alluded to this through the conversation a little bit, but just to sort of spotlight it a little bit, could you describe the consumer experience for renting from Kots? So just from the first touch point and to the end of the process.
Basically, they find our property on the website. Then they call our call center. They get WhatsApp catalogs where the entire sale happens in a digital way without any human interaction, right? Uh, because of high demand from the last, not just 1 year, from 3 years, we've been full, 100%, right?
Wow.
So there's a waiting period of 30 days to get a flat. Now,
Right.
people do not typically wait for 30 days. They just see the pictures and the video and they book the flat. So there is a virtual meet, of course. So we have 3D tours of a flat, which the
Okay.
images are stretched like in reality how the property is going to look like. It is not a
Okay.
rendering, by the way,
Hmm,
right?
hmm.
So that first gives you a very good feel. And
Right.
then we take videos of the flat from a phone, not from a digi camera where it's an edited video. Most of the
Right.
people just give you sample videos, right? Now,
Right.
this you feel okay when I enter, this is how the flat is going to look like. Now, because of
Wow.
our operations model, we can make sure the flat is restored always to the video,
Hmm,
Okay.
hmm.
right?
Okay.
Right.
So once you book, you know what you've seen is what you got. Then you sign a contract. They pay a 2 months advance, right? After they do that, they basically whenever there's an issue of plumbing, electrical, they call us. They raise a ticket with us. Otherwise, at the time of exit, they give a notice, and we serve the notice.
Nowadays we see a lot of developers and also real estate companies adding different verticals like property management or things like that. So, and that for them, it works. For some of them it's an additional profit center. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask, do you see the kind of service heavy aspect of this as a necessity, or do you feel like these could be additional services in the future that like add to the bottom line as well?
Right. There are two services. I think one we are referring is the operations of the project. Second, we enable vendors to sell extra services in terms of water can subscription, food, vehicle wash. So that's a different aspect. When
Right.
it comes to operations, there is no shortcut, right? It's a facility
Hmm.
management. End of
Right.
the day.
Right.
Now, you try to outsource anybody who has experience with agency business. You know, the main problem is ownership. Nobody takes ownership of the problem.
Hmm.
So, you want to guarantee at some point you need to have your own capabilities on ground in the locality.
Hmm.
Unless in future there is a vendor who's kind of coming and solving this problem for us, right?
Right. Right.
Second aspect, coming to enabling vendors, even there we try to take a certain heaviness because we verify the quality, what is going, what is the price, what is the margin we are trying to get to the. So basically, we are using the community as a bargaining chip to promise volumes for the vendor and then make sure there is a quality which they are getting delivered.
Does this mean, Vijit, that different micro markets will have different standardized products, or is it a standardized product as Kots looks to expand maybe across the nation? It'll be a standardized product regardless of where you go within the nation.
I think construction per se is more of a localized business. People's preferences change with the locality. So we don't see this as a city or a country game. We see this as a micro market cluster driven business.
Right.
So in Bangalore, currently we operate out of East cluster and we just started the Northeast as well. So in the East cluster, we are managing about 3 lakh SFT only in the East. So we have not expanded to any city. We do sizable revenues compared to a national player, right?
Right.
So similarly, when we go to Delhi, we would assume we would take a cluster, kind of adapt to the cluster, but we go deep into the business, making it a volume business.
And just to follow up on that, because again, like we said, given the numbers involved, there's only location is paramount here, right? Like certain micro markets will suit this model much better than others. So, with that in mind, what is the sort of expansion path that you're looking at? Which micro markets have you guys identified where this could probably work? Maybe in Bengaluru, but also outside in which other cities?
So if you take the attributes of Whitefield, which is upcoming urban center, lot of people are moving in for jobs. You need more accommodation around the workspaces, but all the housing is actually built further away. So if you can replicate that in India alone, by 2030, you'll be looking at about 100 clusters, right?
Wow. Hmm.
Right. So we are part of Brigade Accelerator program. So one of the other startups is Patek, who works in location intelligence. So we are working on models with them to identify with a similar spending pattern of customers in Whitefield. Where else can we replicate? So we have identified Airport Road, which is
Hmm.
Bangalore Airport, has about 300 acres of IT parks which are coming up right now, with a potential of 2,000 acres which the government has given. So by 2027, we think that the cluster will be ready. So we're
Hmm.
already in talks with developers to get the inventory there by
Wow.
2027.
Okay. Right.
Okay.
So this game is about being ahead of the demand, predicting the demand, so you can get a better deal for the leasing, and then you can make a margin on the business.
I think I'm guessing we had, sort of a similar thought on this is that, like you said, this business is about planning ahead and thinking ahead. So, what do you think the scope is for this organized rental market in India? Because again, yeah, it's something that the both of us have spoken about on our in our own conversations as well. That renting is so disorganized and there's so much latent potential, right, for residential rent. It's such a huge market given the amount of young people coming into the workforce nowadays as well. So
Yeah.
what do you see as the scope going forward for the larger market of residential rent?
Right. If we are looking at a data projection,
Hmm.
to be honest, I don't think a lot of data is accurate. Any big consulting guys trying to put data right makes no sense, right? I think Knight Frank's report 13 billion. See, it's basically done on a small sample, extrapolated to a large number, but makes no sense. When we started, right, in Whitefield, we started with a 30 flats project, first ever, right? And the demand was phenomenally well.
Hmm.
And when I started understanding who is solving this problem, 97% of the demand is solved by the local landlords.
Yeah, yeah.
Even in Whitefield, East Bangalore, where a lot of tough competition, we all account to 3% of the market. It
Right,
is
right.
just about if you get the configuration right at the right price and the right location, right? I feel only East Bangalore alone is about 200, 300 CR market ARR I'm referring to,
Hmm.
right?
Wow, wow.
It's pretty deep, right? Pretty deep.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now, see, for an operator who has 3 lakh SFT and you're almost full in every month or running on 100% occupancy,
Hmm.
and plus there's a lot of competition, it is really hard to actually predict. The only way we can know is If you understand Google searches, there are 40,000 search queries a month looking for a 1 BHK, while all the aggregators like NoBroker average out to 250 listings, out of which 70% are not even relevant. So there's a huge asymmetry, right? But I think this boils down to the supply and demand gap. It is not seen for all the cities, maybe not in tier 2 cities, or maybe not in cities where there's excess supply. Places like Mumbai, Pune, Bangalore have a huge potential.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and I think we're as we're coming to the close of our conversation, I was scared we won't touch on the bigger metros like Mumbai, Delhi, and other such large cities which seem to have untapped demand. But also thinking along those lines, do you feel that the BTR model can also start moving into different scale or price points of residential real estate? And it doesn't have to be anywhere in the near future, but do you think that's something that will slowly start to come about? We're talking about 1 BHKs, maybe we talk about 3 BHKs, you know?
Right. See, to be honest, I think people are addressing that. Like, if you see Leela Residency, or there is already a luxury segment which was running prior to this, right?
Okay.
But the question is hitting scale. Now, our thesis is we understand Indian GDP or per capita is going to double by
Right.
2035, right? Also, a broad trend, people are looking for quality and value for money.
Right.
Not a
Right.
luxury or a high-end premium, but more of a quality, convenience, a
Right.
mass premium segment, right? Like what we're seeing. We are trying to get into that gap and bridge there, right? For that particular segment, right? We see that about 7% people who are getting employed right now are getting into the IT financial sectors, which are usually the high paying jobs, right?
Right.
Now, this is the segment where if Whitefield is not developing new apartments in the hardcore, we are the ones who have to come and address the supply gap.
Right. Right.
Possibly adding to Akshay's, we could go into a more affordable housing. I think the
Right.
middle class or the low income class, there's a huge potential there.
Right.
Understood.
And like you said, the mass premium market or either going into the affordable market. So one thing I wanted to ask you is that obviously there are differences between what Kots is doing versus, student housing co-living providers. But, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing there's some overlap between the people that are looking for 1 BHKs and also maybe considering, other products like a co-living or a student housing, depending on, where they are. So how does Kots differentiate themselves from an offering like a student housing or a co-living, for example? And for someone who's maybe evaluating either or, whether it's a short, like, an 11-month lease at Kots versus looking at a co-living, what are some of the considerations that you think are important?
See, we are creating a category here, which means people do not know about this category yet, right? Then who's solving for the existing market? It's either the local landlords who have own flats, or the basic hospitality companies and the co-living operators who are solving, right? So I see that Stanza entered managed spaces quite some time back.
Right.
Uh, they also solve for this. You can take this entire flat, a 1 BHK, for your experience. But the challenge for that is ultimately it is not a home, right? Whatever said and done, it is shared accommodations ultimately kind of give you a bad experience with time. Solving for community in a touristy space is different. In a regular day-to-day life, people having parties not always the case, right? Which I personally experienced staying in this co-living places, right? When you come back home after a 12-hour shift, you want to have a peaceful stay. You want the kitchen to be clean. You just want to crash on your bed. You don't want to have somebody seeing you all the time, right? The home experience is missing. Second, 50% of our customers are actually married couples.
Right. Right.
None of the operators or products are targeting this segment.
Right.
Student housing average is about 22, 23, or a 24-year-old average they do. Our average customer is 30.8, right? It's a segment after the co-living or a
Right.
PG.
Right.
Average home buyer in India is 35 to 45, the class.
Hmm.
So what do they do before they buy a house? They're
Hmm.
struggling, they're moving around for jobs, they're trying to settle, they're building new relations, right?
Right.
That's the space where we are trying to position housing to solve the problem.
Perfect. And one last thing I kind of wanted to ask you was, in taking this model forward or moving to different places, setting up the supply, like you said, is so important because you have to do it ahead of time and there's a lot of planning involved. So until now, with the build to rent model, what has the feedback from developers been like? What are they seeing as the benefits for them, to maybe do this at scale or replicate this?
The fundamental problem everybody asks us is if your yield is only 5-6% at the best, versus people, the retail investors are getting options to have 8 to 12% in a commercial
Hmm.
or in a strata model. So why would they see this as a lucrative model? So that's a
Right.
number one problem, right? Second problem we see is because it involves a lot of large, numbers and operations and a lot of risk involved in this. So they're hesitant to go forward to take that risk,
Hmm.
right? But I think if the model is replicated or shown successfully at volume, let's say a project with 500 flats,
Hmm.
people will build the confidence. See, we need
Right.
to understand the game to build 40, 50 flats is very different from building a 4-acre project.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Mhm.
I see the smaller developers are more open to this thought because they're struggling. Not a lot of people are preferring to buy small projects these days, right? They
Hmm.
all
Right.
want
Right.
to gated societies. So this at a scale of a 10,000, 20,000 SFT, we are able to differentiate and convince people. We're
Hmm.
also asking them, why would you want to sell if your property is appreciating at, let's say, 10, 11% because it's a high growing area and you're getting a rental yield of 6%, net
Right.
net being
Right.
17%, which is very good investment as a product, right? That is something which we are able to convince. But I think large developers, we're still figuring out, how do we pitch the projects? How can they differentiate?
Right. And I guess that's also, kind of bet on the growth of these areas as well. That you inflation proof your investment for a long lease, and then once the lease is done, you take a call on depending on where the rates in the area are at that point, right?
Right.
So, Vijay, now that we've spoken about, the kind of value proposition for developers and also the experience for tenants, I think guess the remaining angle left in this is, the investors, right? So when we talk about a build to rent model, what is the incentive here for an investor or a real estate investor, institutional investor, maybe to come in and finance these projects?
Right. I would think it is usually the end retail investor who purchases a second house, a third house, the ideal fit for this.
Hmm.
When we spoke to large developers, especially the A grade developers, what we've realized, a lot of these buyers are actually second time, third time home buyers, right? They're
Right.
not first time. If you know the example of Prestige City,
Hmm.
large project which got sold out even before opening, so
Right.
that demonstrates the lot of people willing to buy real estate as an investment, right?
Hmm.
Now there's another trend where a lot of millennials like us would want to have passive income, right?
Right. Right.
Now, if you combine this, there is no other better financial product than residential BTR for getting a fixed rent while your asset is appraising. One
Hmm.
example, one of the projects we signed an MOU with a large celebrity developer, 600 flats. Uh, the flat is going to come around 55 lakhs. The down payment is around 35 ish.
Hmm. Hmm.
Remaining is going to be financed by the EMI paid by Kots. We
Hmm.
are seeing by the time they finish their 15-year rental agreement, I mean the lease agreement, right? They're looking at a 3x return.
Okay. Wow.
Right?
Hmm.
About 3.5x is what they're getting. No, averaging it is much better than what you get in your Nifty or any other portfolio, right? At the best, you
Hmm.
make this 12%, 15%, right?
Hmm.
And imagine you're able to pay off the loan, you get for life a rent yielding product. And two
Right.
or three such products will give you a benefit to retire soon in your life. And that's
Hmm.
what I think a lot of millennials are looking for right now.
Right, right. Perfect. I think that's all the questions that we had for you today, Vijay. I just wanted to say from both Akshay and I, thank you so much for teaching us about this new model and also telling us all this information about COTS. I'm sure it's relevant to a lot of the younger people or people close to our age group watching or listening to this podcast. And yeah, just thank you again.
Yeah, Really appreciate you taking the time to join us here.
Thanks, Yash. Thanks, Akshay. Lovely meeting you guys.
Thank you for listening to Concrete Conversations, the Indian real estate podcast.
We're excited to announce that we're now in video format on YouTube.
For highlights from our episodes, check us out on Instagram.
And as always, stay tuned for more concrete conversations.